Jets and Chargers. It's Monday Night Football tonight at MetLife Stadium. We'll talk keys to the game today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, November 6th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you're listening on a podcast source and enjoy the show, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, today we are previewing Monday Night Football. The Jets host the Los Angeles Chargers tonight at MetLife Stadium. Kickoff time is scheduled for 8:15 p.m. Eastern. The game will be shown on ESPN. And I got to warn you in advance, I think we're going to see plenty of replays of the Aaron Rodgers injury. And that's because the last time the Jets played Monday Night Football, it was week 1 when they played the Buffalo Bills. That was the last time ESPN was in town to show a Jets game. And, the Jets have had 2 primetime games so far this season, and they've both been really crazy games. There was that Monday night game where Aaron Rodgers got injured 4 plays in, but the Jets had an unbelievable win. Then a few weeks later, the Jets hosted the Kansas City Chiefs on Sunday Night Football, fell behind 17-0 in the first quarter and rallied, tied the game, then lost it in the fourth quarter. This is the first of back-to-back primetime games. The Jets head out to Las Vegas next weekend for a game against the Raiders. So a couple of primetime games against AFC West competition. And it's the second week in what I've called is like a 3-week stretch for the Jets to bank some victories. The Jets can very easily get to 6-3, and I know no game's easy in the NFL. I know a short week, a road trip out to Las Vegas next weekend. I'm not saying that's going to be an easy game necessarily. I'm not saying tonight's game is going to be an easy game for the Jets, but this is a 3-week stretch where you get the Giants, you get the Chargers, you get the Raiders. 3 winnable games. Jets win all 3 of them. They're 6-3. They'll be in really good shape going forward. And this is an opportunity for the Jets to show that they're a playoff caliber team. And to do that, they'll have to beat the Chargers. And there have been some interesting developments on the injury front this week. So the injuries the Jets are dealing with could impact this game quite a bit. There's some, and a lot of them are on the offensive side of the ball. The offensive line has been reshuffled over and over so far this season because the Jets have had so many injuries on the line. It's another season where the Jets are so banged up front. Now, it's not uncommon to have injuries on the offensive line. And I don't know if it's necessarily this common, though, to have as many injuries as the Jets have suffered the last 2 years up front. There is some good news. It sounds like Joe Tippmann's going to play. He was a full participant in practice near the end of the week. Now, Dwayne Brown was also returned to the practice field this week, but he's been ruled out of this game. Brown has been activated from IR. He was a full participant in all 3 practices for the Jets this week, but he's been ruled out. The Jets will not call him up to the active roster. However, Tippmann, who missed last week's game against the Giants after suffering an injury to his quad before the bye, was a full participant in the last practice of the week. So it sounds like he's good to go. And you would have to think he's going to play the center position, because the Jets ended up with Xavier Newman at center last week because of all the injuries with Connor McGovern and Wes Schweitzer going down. You'd have to think that Jets are going to put Tippmann at center, which is another new alignment up front for the Jets. And you could see Billy Turner or Max Mitchell at one of the guard spots. These guys are both kind of came up as tackles. It's tough. I mean, this is not the matchup, against a team that's got edge rushers like Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, other talented pass rushers. Chargers have a lot of talented pass rushers on their team. You don't want to be breaking in a new offensive line for this game, but that's what the situation the Jets are in. They don't really have a choice. And added to that is the challenge that Tippmann's a center. He played center at Wisconsin. In fact, if you were worried about an adjustment, I think you'd probably be more worried when they threw him in at guard because he's got much more experience at center, at least playing college football. But it's a challenge. he has played guard prior to this in the NFL, so it'll be a bit of a new experience for him, at least as far as the NFL goes, at least as far as what he's been used to the last couple of weeks. So a new center in the lineup and another new alignment for the Jets up front. That'll be a challenge. Also for the Jets, Allen Lazard is questionable for this game. He's dealing with a knee injury, and this broke late in the week. He was actually not on the injury report Thursday or Friday. And if you're not familiar with the way the injury report works, typically in the NFL, Monday's a day guys go in to watch film, they get treatment, maybe have some team meetings. Tuesday is typically the day off in the NFL, and that's where the coaches are in the facility and they're kind of cooking up the game plan for the week on the day the players are off. So then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday are like the days where the game plan gets implemented. So you get the injury reports Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Lazard was not on the injury report Wednesday or Thursday. Suddenly on Friday, he's limited in practice with a knee injury. And that's a big deal for the Jets. It's not that Lazard's great. It's just the Jets right now on offense are about like a receiver and a half passing game, with Garrett Wilson being the receiver and Lazard, not being great, but being better than the other options. The Jets, it sounds like, will get Randall Cobb back for this game. He's not giving you a whole lot. It sounds like Xavier Gipson's going to be a full participant. He's been on the injury report with an ankle injury. So if Lazard can't go, then you're probably looking at a lot of snaps for Cobb and a lot of snaps for Gipson. And neither of those guys have been particularly productive this year. But the Jets, Jets are going to need somebody to step up if Lazard can't go, because he is the number 2 receiver on this team. He may not be a great number 2 receiver, but he's better than Cobb. He's better than Gipson right now. And, Garrett Wilson can only do so much. I don't know that you can necessarily increase Garrett Wilson's target share all that much at this point. He's already getting a massive share of the Jets' targets. So that could be a challenge. And then some injuries on the defensive side of the ball, namely Adrian Amos, who's questionable. Another late addition to the injury report with an ankle injury. He was another guy who was not on the injury report Thursday or Friday, Wednesday or Thursday. Then suddenly Friday, the last day of the injury report comes out, he's limited with an ankle injury. So we'll see what the Jets do at the safety position. If Adrian Amos can't go, it'll be, maybe a bit of a challenge there. And I don't know, maybe could Ashton Davis see more snaps at safety? If you've been following, Ashton Davis has kind of been playing a linebacker role for the Jets the last couple of games. It's almost like he's taken over the number 3 linebacker role from Jamie Sherwood. So I don't know, maybe that could be more snaps for Ashton Davis at the safety position, which may not be such a great thing, but situation the Jets find themselves in. Look, everybody's got injuries, and I don't think any of these injuries is as significant as Aaron Rodgers is for the Jets. So you just have to figure out ways to work around them. And these are the challenges you face when you get to November, when you get down the stretch. The hits add up. Guys get injured. You have to figure out ways to replace them. And that's what the Jets will have to do in this one. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the offensive side of the ball for the Jets. It's a unit, let's be honest, has really struggled for this team. What do they need to do to get things going? That's what we'll talk about ahead here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. And you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. The Jets don't really need to use LinkedIn Jobs. We just talked about all the injuries they've suffered. Well, they have backups, but if you lose somebody for your small business, you got to replace them. And LinkedIn Jobs is a great tool to do that. It's really easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs, then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. This is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers for this is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday, and then bonus episodes as needed. If there's breaking news, sometimes we'll do them after games. Really appreciate your support for this show. We are previewing tonight's Monday night action between the New York Jets and the Los Angeles Chargers. Kickoff time scheduled for 8:15 p.m. Eastern time. Game will be shown on ESPN. Jets got to get their offense going. And it's going to be a challenge because of some of the stuff we talked about in the first segment. one of the issues, I think the biggest issue with the Jets right now is the offensive line. The good news is Tippmann sounds like he's going to be back, but Jets have been decimated by injury up front. And look, let's be honest. The offensive line the Jets put out there week one was not exactly the greatest unit in the NFL to begin with. It was a below average offensive line. Now, when you lose starters on the offensive line, especially a below average offensive line, it's kind of a double whammy. Because first of all, the guys you're putting in, they're not as good as the starters. If we go with the assumption that backups are typically worse than starters, then there's a pretty obvious way in which injuries negatively impact your team. But there's also the chemistry issue. Chemistry exists at other spots in the NFL, especially when you're trying to break in new receivers. But it really impacts you on the offensive line. And you can see it across the league. When you have to insert new guys on the offensive line, there are more frequent breakdowns. It's the spot above all others where you need to know what the guy next to you is going to do in any given situation, because the reaction time is really slow, really low. So the Jets having to constantly reshuffle on the offensive line is tough. And I think that Nathaniel Hackett has to figure out a way to help these guys out. Hackett's been very inconsistent with how many times he's left extra blockers in. There have been weeks where he's left a lot in. There are weeks where he's rarely left an extra blocker in. I think that they really need to leave extra blockers in on a more frequent basis. And I mean, part of it's just when you leave an extra blocker in, you're not having as many receivers go out into passing patterns, but it's not like the Jets have a ton of receiver depth anyway. I mean, a lot of it runs through Garrett Wilson. And I think another thing Hackett has to do, he's got to figure out a way to get Garrett Wilson away from Asante Samuel Jr. So that could mean motion. It could mean which side of the field does he line up on? It could mean getting him into the slot. And it's not so much that I think that Asante Samuel Jr. is a bad matchup for Garrett Wilson. It's just the Chargers have some really shaky corners once you get past him. And so much of this offense, especially if Lazard is either out or even if Lazard's compromised, so much of the passing game is going to have to go through Garrett that you're just going to have to figure out a way to make this offense function as easily as possible. And that's really, I think Garrett, even if Lazard plays, because he's questionable, I think sometimes we forget this. If a guy's questionable, sometimes they're healthy enough to play, but they're not going to be able to play at as high of a level. And that means other guys need to pick up the slack. So that's I think that's a huge key right now for the New York Jets. They got to figure out ways to maximize Garrett Wilson in this one. Part of this also means that, Randall Cobb's got to do something. I'm sorry, he's got to catch the ball. And Xavier Gipson, the Jets talk a lot about Xavier Gipson. Well, the Jets have kind of pulled back on using Xavier Gipson. There were points recently where, Cobb was returning punts because, that Gibson put the ball on the ground a couple times in Denver. And the Jets made a big deal when they traded Mecole Hardman out of, Xavier Gipson took his role. Well, Xavier Gipson really hasn't played much of a role on offense. So he's got to step up. And part of I think the Jets need to manufacture touches in space for Gibson, because I don't know how much he brings to the table, but he definitely brings a lot of speed to the mix. And if you get him the ball in space, the defense at least has to respect it. And he's got the ability to make big plays. So if you get him the ball in space, if you just flip it out to him, maybe he can break one. And for a struggling offense, you kind of need those home run plays. Of course, the guy who hits the most home runs for the Jets on the offensive side of the ball is Breece Hall. And Breece is having an excellent season. I think that Breece is really struggling. I think to the extent Breece has had a tough time and on the ground the last two games, he hasn't produced all that much. I think a lot of that is just the blocking is not very good, but there's a lot of inconsistency in the Jets run game where the average is really high, but the success rate is not. And again, like breaking in a new offensive line, I'm not sure the extent to which this is fixable, but you'd like to see the Breece add, and Breece is hitting home runs, and home runs are really helping the Jets. I mean, look, the Jets don't win the game against the Giants without Breece, taking that 50-yard touchdown to the house in the first half off the reception. But I think part of the reason the Jets are struggling so much is both in the passing game and the run game, they're struggling to have successful plays consistently. When Breece is getting like a lot of big gains, but he's not grinding out like the 5-6 yard runs. And look, I'd rather have the big gains than the 5-6 yard runs, because the big gains typically result in points, whereas the 5-6 yard runs, they could result in a drive where you get a couple first downs and punt. I think the Jets are just at such an extreme where they're just having so many issues having success on offense that they need to get something going with Breece. And part of this means, again, a little bit more creativity. I think the Nathaniel Hackett offense has been sorely lacking in creative ways to get guys touches in space. And if you can't block the ball as effectively, you got to make more of an effort to get Brees involved in the passing game, which the Jets did last week. I'll give them credit for that, but there needs to be more of that. And I know Brees did have a pretty bad drop in the second half of that game, but you just got to keep trying to figure out ways to feed him the ball. It's not so easy when your offense really has two primary playmakers, but that also puts more on you as a coach. It means you have to deliver. It means that you have to come up with creative ways to put your guys in position to make plays. I don't think Nathaniel Hackett's done that well enough so far this season. I think it's going to be imperative for him to do it in this game. Now, here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll turn our attention to the defensive side of the ball. It's the dominant unit for the Jets. I'll give you a couple key matchups that I have my eye on, and that's as we continue this Monday game preview edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. And if you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action, in part because, once again, Jets not getting a lot of respect from the odds makers. Jets at home, Jets with a winning record. At the time we are recording this, Jets are 3.5-point underdogs. So just think that through, what I just said. You can get $150 in bonus bets on any winning $5 bet. So if you believe in the Jets tonight, that could be your ticket. The FanDuel app is super easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast. On this Monday, we're previewing Jets-Chargers. It's Monday Night Football. Jets with their third primetime game of the season. Jets schedule loaded with primetime games this year because they all thought Aaron Rodgers would be playing in them. I mean, who knows what will happen by the end of the season, but right now Aaron Rodgers is not in the lineup. Another primetime game for Zach Wilson. Jets hoping to win their fourth straight game, hoping to improve their record to 5-3, a game that's very winnable on paper, even though the Jets are technically the underdog in this one, if you listen to the odds makers. And we know that the Jets defense has carried them to most of their wins this season. They've played a lot of really solid football. So what are the key matchups? What are the areas the Jets can really exploit in this game? I got my eyes on Quinnen Williams, and I know I sound like a broken record here. Every dayers are probably tired of hearing me say this. Nobody should be criticizing Quinnen Williams, even though he's not putting up great numbers this year. He's having such an impact. If you watch him, he's dominating. And the defensive tackle positions, it's not always a spot where the numbers reflect how well somebody's playing. Last year for Quinnen, it did. But if you look at the great defensive ends of the NFL, and you take out Aaron Donald, and maybe you could say Chris Jones, maybe he's a guy who always puts up high sack totals with Kansas City. You take out those guys. Even the great defensive tackles, you look, some of their years are impressive statistically. Some of the years it's not so impressive statistically. And even Chris Jones, I'll say, I think Quinnen Williams is a better player because Quinnen Williams is a better run defender. Quinnen Williams is a more complete player than Chris Jones. So I don't think it's fair to look at Quinnen Williams' lack of statistics and say, oh, he's not having a good season. I think he's having a great season. I think, even though the numbers aren't what they were a year ago, he's still playing really well. And I keep waiting for that breakout game. I keep waiting for the statistics to finally match the level of play. This might be the game because the Chargers have an interior offensive line, and Quinnen usually lines up near the left guard. You look at what they have at guard. Zion Johnson, he's okay. He's not that great. At center, the Chargers have issues with Will Clapp. I mean, these are matchups tailor-made for Quinnen to have a big game. I feel like the big game's coming. You can't keep playing as well as Quinnen's playing, and the stats to not eventually come. So Quinnen's going to look really good. I think this could be the breakout game for Quinnen Williams. I think if you're looking for the key matchup for the Jets, it could be in the slot. Now, we all know how great Sauce Gardner is. We know how great DJ Reed is. Both of them having an excellent season. But quietly, Michael Carter II's become one of the elite slot corners in the NFL. And I think he's going to see a lot of time against Keenan Allen in this game. It's one of the luxuries the Jets have. There's lots of complaints. Why don't the Jets have Sauce Gardner travel with the other team's #1 receiver? Well, they don't really need to because DJ Reed's so rock solid on the other side. Sauce man's the left side, DJ man's the right side. But even when teams try and put their best receiver in the slot, Michael Carter II, man, he's locked down. He's as good as they come in the NFL. What a tremendous pick he's looking like. 5th round pick in 2021. He has slowly blossomed into a really excellent slot corner. And I think his matchup against Keenan Allen is going to be key. Another matchup I have my eye on, I mentioned this last Thursday on our crossover Thursday show with the folks from Locked On Chargers, Austin Eckler versus Quincy Williams. Eckler's not having as great of a season as we've been accustomed to. When you get to a certain age at the running back position, you wonder, is this the end of the line for him? Well, we know Quincy Williams is having a great season. Quincy Williams has, talking about a guy who's blossomed into a star, another one, Quincy Williams. He's been really good in coverage. He's become like the guy the Jets needed. The Jets needed that guy in the middle of the field who could run around, make plays, but also the guy who could lock down tight ends, the guy who could lock down running backs one-on-one. There aren't many of them in the NFL. Quincy Williams has looked like one of them, and if he can lock down Austin Eckler in this game, I really like the Jets' chances of slowing down this Los Angeles offense. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source and enjoy the show, give this episode a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help us out, help other Jets fans find the Locked On Jets. Enjoy the game. Enjoy your Monday. We'll be back after the game to break it all down. Jets Chargers tonight at MetLife Stadium.